to retail trade stores that don't have, the big, personnel that you could have with Target or Walmart, to try to give these stores a better idea about, okay, what would you buy in, let's say a community like Stevens Point. I have to laugh, though, because they give names to these groups, such as Money and Brains, God's Country, Country Casuals, and so forth, that they basically have, there's probably at least 64, 65 different of these groups that they've kind of taken a look at. To be perfectly honest, this is human nature. I tell my students this all the time. I don't have to throw the data into a GIS or a geodemographic program, statistical analysis. I know exactly what you guys buy. I know exactly what you guys eat. Let's see, poor student, no money, basically goes out, sometimes, you have pizza, you get peanut butter, high protein, ramen noodles, cheap type of thing. And I can honestly just tell you exactly what you're going to buy. Again, it's the same basic sort of idea. So these types of techniques are been used, and they have been used at least over the last 10, 15 years to try to see what possibly something could be sold. Now, totally different topic. In terms of urban planning and modeling, basically there's new technology where you try to use devices like LiDAR, light detection and ranging. This is a new type of remote sensing where basically you can do scans of the earth, but not just scanning the surface. You can scan the top of a forestry canopy, you can scan basically the top of buildings, you can set the spectral readings such that you can take a look to see what you can read from this. And then what you can develop from that are basically very realistic models. Here, for example, is a software ArcGIS city engine. We're going to rotate it here for a second. And you're going to see that when you rotate it, we can then extrude the buildings based upon their height or based upon LiDAR that you have. We can then take these buildings and leave them as that such, or we can start throwing different sorts of facades on the buildings themselves, or we can have models of the type of buildings, whether it be a house or whether or not an office building, and then we can make modifications on that. So here's going to be a change of that here in a second. And therefore, we start to create these three-dimensional models that we can use in, let's say, planning. Or you're trying to decide on where the new park is going to be, and you want to be able to visualize that information. So you can take kind of a standard model of a building, or then you can try to change the facade. Maybe you want to make changes saying, no, I want a different sort of window. I don't want that particular window at that time. I want to change the roof structure at the same time. This has become easier than ever before to create these because of the type of technology that we actually have. And then there's times when you want a building that's precisely the way it looks, like the Capitol building in Madison. Then you could actually then take these basically constructed buildings of a standard model and then actually change that and insert in the exact model that's based upon pictometric, basically oblique photographs of the building that you have for that. Now, you might say, no, don't want to do that. You might say, how could you use this? Well, we can use it for planning, or we can use it in a movie. Pixar last year had Cars 2, all right? So here's a little clip from that. They were basically going down London, so your kids or grandkids might have watched this at the same time, you with them. And this whole set of buildings here in London, that was all done with GIS City Engine. They created that from scratch based upon the footprints of the buildings of London. So what you saw here was not some cartoonist drawing this in. This was all realistic models that they inserted in here. What they had to worry about was the main characters, their cars. The rest of it, though, that was there. They built that using the GIS art system. Next, GIS, disease detection. There's been a lot that's been going on in terms of GIS, in terms of health. And one of the big areas in actually medical geography, it's called, is disease detection. And very quickly, I know I'm running along here. Very quickly, what I want to show is that this has been going on for quite some time. When you're trying to track diseases, the spread of diseases, this goes back to 1854 in London, where you had John Snow, and he created something called a dot map. And what he was doing was that he was showing deaths from cholera in the Broad Street area. And so the map that he used, this is a reproduction right here, looked like this. He was putting dots, essentially. And the dots indicated the deaths. And then the X's that you saw there, that indicated actually a water pump in terms of where people went out and got their water. There was no indoor plumbing, essentially. And he was looking at that, and then he, of course, noticed the pattern. He noticed the clustering around this particular pump on Broad Street. And so, as you can see right here, there were more deaths in this area than any other area at that time in London, and so he reasoned out that that pump had something to do with it. So he analyzed all this and patterns in the area of Soho at the time, and there was a disproportionate number. And with nearly 500 cases within a few blocks of a single water pump, Broad Street, today it's actually been renamed, it's Broadwick Street, he reasoned out that that pump had to be closed down. Now, it took him a while to get the city council to actually do that, but essentially that's what happened. And as soon as the pump was closed down, the cases of cholera disappeared. Direct relationship to that. Using, again, the idea of mapping out this information and taking a look at that. Today, of course, we use this kind of same technique for tracking such things as West Nile virus, the hantavirus that was in the news recently, looking at environmental problems such as lead paint poisoning, the cases of that, and trying to deduce where it is actually occurring and how to stop it. Emergency management, very quickly. This is actually, I was in New York City back in February, and I was given the opportunity for a big tour. They have a brand new Operation Emergency Management Center. This is their basically their vehicle that they use when they go around the city, mobile vehicle. Very interesting side note is we went and visited that, and inside, you know, they have these huge plotters to create maps and basically show. But the one thing they don't have in there, and we all asked, he says, hey, you got this huge van in here. There's no bathroom in terms of that. And they said, why is that? And he says, well, when we go to an emergency site and people don't have bathrooms, the first thing they do is they knock on our door and say, do you have a bathroom here? I can use it at the same time. So they decided that they couldn't have one because they couldn't get their work done for that. There in the operations, they have a massive GIS system, huge boards. We were there. Each one of these desks basically was one component of one operation of New York City, so that all the heads of all New York City would come to that operation, and then being given input to trying to solve problems during an emergency situation in New York City itself. And so you can see we were given lectures in terms of an emergency situation, what they were actually going to be utilizing, and then the types of data they collected. This is just one sheet. They had 4 or 5 of these sheets of what they put in their GIS. Some things make sense. Snow removal priority, soil type, parking garages, sometime, pharmacies, and so forth. Other things were kind of odd, such as Asian longhorn beetle quarantine zones. You know, so it's kind of like, well, okay, you know, it just depends on what you want to have, you know, placed in there. And then they would come up with plans, such as, what if there was a hurricane? What would be the evacuation zones? What would be affected the most by the surge of the flooding? This is all done through GIS, allowing them to plan this out very carefully ahead of time. Then the third part of our technology, 1990s, global positioning systems took off. Now, GPS was actually in existence in the 1980s, but it was of such a crude form at that time, and they were still putting satellites up, that it really wasn't used that much. But starting in the 1990s, GPS matured in a system that today supports millions of GPS receivers used by a multitude of military personnel, government workers, businesses, individuals. It's made up of a system called Navstar. There's at least 24 satellites orbiting the Earth at one time. There's usually at least 5 or 6 orbiting overhead at any one time. And it can basically relay information to any receiver or chip that you might have. There are hundreds, probably thousands of uses of GIS. I should say hundreds, I'm going to say thousands. Entrepreneurs daily seem to dream up new, practical applications of how one can use GPS technology. Generally, it falls into 4 main categories: navigation, wayfinding, tracking, and measuring. Let's look at some of those. First, navigation. Navigation is very simple. We navigate all the time. It's the method of determining position, course, and distance traveled. Essentially, it is you planning and plotting a route that will get you from point A to point B. This might mean planning, go to the family vacation home up north, or maybe it's just providing instructions in the front seat of the family car for the driver, you know, whoever is riding shotgun or who's ever helping you navigate at the same time. So here we go. So now we have Garmin's, TomToms, what have you, in terms of the type of systems. Here's the satellites orbiting, rendering of that. and then potentially they're beaming information, of course, through radio signals down to any receiver, giving you, of course, your exact position. So you go in, you say, oh yeah, I agree to that, at the same time, where to, and then you say, okay, I want to go there. And of course, while you're doing this, you have hopefully a friendly voice telling you. One thing I always like the fact is you can do like an English accent, Australian accent, somebody's talking to you. You can have somebody very harsh, this is what you're going to do. Or you have a nice pleasant voice at the same time. It was kind of interesting too, because I was reading a book called Maphead by basically, and what the author said is that he went in and he hacked his GPS on the text. And so usually they just say recalculating when you go someplace wrong, recalculating. He reprogrammed it. He basically had expressions like, you idiot, you took the wrong turn at the same time. So he was doing that. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going the wrong spot at the same time. So now you might say, how do they create all these maps? There are companies, two main companies out there, Navtech and TeleAtlas. And they basically have cars that look like that. And they go and they measure every single road in the United States, driving around all the time, measuring this, updating information, and then selling it to companies in terms of creating this like Garmin for that. So you'll see these from time to time and saying, oh yeah, there was a Navtech car. Now, do they make a lot of money on it? Yeah, in fact, Navtech was just bought by Nokia for cell phones. They're trying to buy up some of the markets in terms of what's occurring. And Navtech basically was hired by the Michigan Department of Transportation to actually collect real-time traffic speed data. In major cities, what Navtech does, for example, is they actually put up these posts. You really don't notice them that much, but there are these kind of large, tall posts with camera systems. And so they collect that data in terms of traffic flow. And they basically then use it, and for example, the city then might use it to try to discover in terms of problems or keep updated on that at the same time. So again, there are people out here collecting that information all the time. Second part of GPS is wayfinding, the ability to find a destination using signs, landmarks, or maps in order to orient oneself to properly navigate. All right, that makes sense. You want the information about geographic features that will allow you to properly navigate, such as, did I just pass Belt's ice cream? So say, where am I going? So what's one part of this? Well, geocaching, it's a sport that took off in the year 2000, and this is where you can go out and have a treasure hunt. People will go out and hide different sorts of, it could be in a Tupperware container, these little containers, and they'll put them places, and they'll give the coordinates, and they'll put them online, www.geocaching.com. And then you can go and search for those. And kids love this and say, oh, I'm going to go, search for this and see what's in this little container. And basically you can do this across the country. In Canada, they have hidden some spots. In fact, there's different categories. I don't have time to go into it, but there's one with the extreme geocaching where they'll hide things like on top of this large, like Devil's Tower area that it'll be very hard to get to. Say, here, try to find this one. And so here at Stevens Point, even where we are, right here, there's a couple of caches around here. There's one called Picking Through the Past, or that somebody hid that, they name them sometimes. And SPACVB downtown, it's by the UWSP Geocaching Club in the campus, and they have those. So you can actually go online and take a look, and then you'll take your GPS receiver, and then you go and you try to basically find that information. You can also create your own little cache and help people out. You can buy a little caching chirp here, like $22.99. And basically you hide it with your cache, and so when you get close to it, it'll chirp at you. Chirp, 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 like this. So instead of really hunting for it, you can actually help people find the cache itself. There's tracking, process of following someone or something. In GPS, this relates to you following the path of an object or person along. Now you might say, well, why do that? Well, there's lots of reasons, of course. One might be tracking the movement of a wolf, or maybe a semi-truck, or your teenage daughter. I say that just because there was a story about that, but that's a whole other case. Or in one case, a wife was tracking her cheating husband at the same time. These are all actually real-life examples, kind of interesting.
Please check them out. Thank you for using the public library.
Now, something more interesting, essentially, is taking a look at something like UPS, FedEx, UPS. What do? Well, they have very, very sophisticated integrated GPS, GIS databases that they use. And they have to. They're trying to be the most efficient. They're trying to deliver the package with the least amount of time, planning out optimal routes, trying to see where they can have the most efficient path. Let's say you've got 100 packages or 120 packages to deliver during the day. What is the best way to deliver those? You know, for you, when you have a multi-purpose shopping trip, you might go 4 or 5 places at one time. Let's say you've got 120 places to go during the next 10 hours. What's the most efficient route? That's tough. So what occurs now is there's databases that are used. There are geoanalytical people who then will program at the beginning of the day, during the night, and then at the beginning of the day, then the drivers will go out. The tags actually have all the information they know in terms of location and even where the package is placed in the truck. Where you have the package in the truck is very critical. Then you'll have a driver pick up his personal digital assistant or computer. It will tell him exactly, him or her, what they should do in terms of delivering the packages in the most efficient manner. If there's a problem where they have a change, they'll call back to the router dispatcher. They'll reprogram with a GIS to say, how have you changed and what you should do for that. This also occurs in terms of, you know, here's basically routing for UPS. Well, what about tracking an elephant? All right? You can do the very same thing. You can put GPS in collars on many different types of wildlife to track so you understand the behavior more. Here, this is where they had to make a huge collar. And basically what occurred there is that they had the GPS basically up at the top, and then at the bottom, they had basically a transducer that would transmit the signal to a laptop computer when you got close to it later on. So they go and they track down the elephant, and basically they tranquilize it again. And then once they tranquilize it, they're going to run up to the elephant, and the wildlife biologist, he's going to hop on the elephant and put that huge collar on. Of course, the elephant really doesn't enjoy getting shot by a tranquilizing gun. I don't think anybody would. So then